I'm Caleb Giddings from Gun Nuts Media, and today I'm sitting in my relatively comfortable office as opposed to being on the range or somewhere like that to talk to you about terrible cartridges for self-defense. Now, this video is going to be about rounds that are not good for self-defense for a number of reasons. And before people can get pedantic in the comments, which I know will happen, we're not going to be discussing things like, yes, we all know it's terrible to carry a 50 AE for self-defense, and that a 44 Magnum's not really a realistic choice unless you're worried about defending yourself from bears, and no one's going to carry a Carl Gustav. Well, I mean, I would carry a Carl Gustav if I could, but that's neither here nor there. Instead, we're going to be confining this discussion to handgun cartridges that are in relatively common use for concealed carry and personal defense. And I will say this also right off the bat. If you want the best cartridge for home defense and you're not concerned about concealment, you want a 12 gauge with double-aught buck. End of discussion. But let's actually get into the discussion here of handgun cartridges and what cartridges are good or bad for self-defense. This list is going to go from 5 to 1, with 1 being the cartridge that is the worst for self-defense, and number 5 being, I guess, the least bad. Starting at number 5, which is the least bad cartridge for self-defense, we have the venerable 32 ACP. Now, I do want to point out that for the most part in this video, I'm not taking pokes at specific manufacturers. I actually really like Hornady ammunition. I use it a lot in a lot of different guns. This just happened to be the only box of 32 I had laying around. So, 32 ACP. This is number 5 on the list because it's on the borderline of being viable for self-defense. And yes, I know the comments are going to be full of people saying, well, you wouldn't line up to get shot by any of them. No, I wouldn't. But just because I don't want to get shot in the chest doesn't mean that a cartridge is good for self-defense in that instance. The problem with the 32 ACP is that, especially with today's ammunition technology, there are very few guns that you can get in 32 ACP that you can't also get in 380, which is better. And realistically, the glut of micro 9mm pistols, from the M&P Shield to the Glock 43 or the Beretta Nano or the Sig 938, have really made the super compact 32 and even to some extent the 380 kind of obsolete, because when you can get a 9mm, which is a proper service cartridge, in a super compact package, why wouldn't you? The 32 has an interesting history of it used to actually be a service cartridge over in Europe, where they don't, actually care about shooting stuff. And as a result, it gained a lot of popularity in the States many, many years ago, and it's been used for a long time, but in its modern form, it's just outclassed and anemic. It doesn't outperform any of the modern service cartridges, obviously, and when you're dealing with a pocket-sized, mouse-sized gun, you might as well go with a 380 as opposed to a 32. Moving on to number 4, we have another cartridge invented by John Moses Browning. This is the 25 ACP, also known as 6.35 millimeter Browning. I say what I'm about to say as someone who carried a 25 for a while, because I had a real job that didn't involve carrying a gun and would have gotten fired from that job if people had known I had a gun. So I carried a Beretta Jetfire 25 in a pocket, and I carried that gun for years. It was a great little gun. I carried it knowing that a Beretta Jetfire and a 25 is not an optimal self-defense rig, but it was quite literally all I had. The problem with the 25 is, well, it's a 25. I mean, that's really what you're getting down to right there. It is a tiny cartridge. It doesn't frequently penetrate well, and this is something that we're going to touch on here later, is penetration and handgun wounding mechanics. But the reason why most of these cartridges are on this list is because they fail at one of the aspects of handgun wounding mechanics. So we're going to do this really briefly. There is no such thing as stopping power when it comes to handguns. Until you start dealing with magnum pressure cartridges and things like that, stopping power is all a myth. The only way a handgun incapacitate somebody is by crushing tissue. There's no hydrostatic shock, there's no temporary wound cavity. Those are not wounding mechanisms that matter with handguns. The only thing that matters with handguns is the permanent cavity that is crushed by the path of the bullet. With tiny non-service mouse gun calibers like the 32 or the 25, they frequently lack the penetration to reach major internal organ structures, to go through bone, and these sorts of things that bullets often need to do. And because they're so small, the amount of tissue that they crush is insignificant. So 25, 32, they don't, and the big problem with them is they lack the penetrative power to get through major bone structures, or to sometimes even penetrate things like thick jackets and that kind of stuff. So you don't want to carry around that won't penetrate far enough into the bad guy to actually stop the fight. Which brings us to number 3. All right, number 3, we're getting up into the ones that are actually bad, is 22 long rifle. Yes, I know 22 long rifle has killed a lot of people, and I'm sure someone in the comments will post, well, more people are killed by 22 than any other round in America, which people say that a lot, but I've never actually seen any stats that back that up. But the reason 22's on here is it has all the same problems that 25 has, in that it lacks sufficient power to penetrate major bones, to get through, to penetrate deep enough to hit major organs, etc., etc., and it's a rimfire, which means it's not as reliable as a centerfire cartridge. That's why the 25 was actually ranked lower than it, because if you must carry a micro caliber round for self-defense, the 25 is a better choice because it's a centerfire and it will be more reliable. All right. Now, the number 2 for the second worst cartridge for self-defense is, and again, we're not taking any shots at any manufacturers here, the number 2 is 40 Smith Wesson. That's right, 40 Smith Wesson. But Caleb, why? 40 was so beloved by cops. The 40 Smith Wesson was born in an era where we didn't understand handgun wounding mechanisms. That's just as blanket a statement as I can make for that. The problem with the 40 is there's nothing that the 40 does outside of a competition shooting aspect that you can't do better either with a 9mm or a 45. So here's what I mean by that. With a 9mm, you get capacity, all right? You get all of the capacity. You get a 17-round gun in a Glock 17 as opposed to 15 rounds in a Glock 22. You get 15 in a Glock 19 as opposed to 13 in a Glock 23. More is better. More is almost always better, actually. The other problem is, again, remember what we said about there's no such thing as stopping power, okay? Handgun wounding mechanics, especially in modern handgun bullets, are all designed to do the same thing. So if I shoot a Winchester PDX-1 Defender in 9mm or 40 or 45, it's going to do the same thing regardless of the caliber. It's going to penetrate more than 12 inches, and it's going to expand to a diameter of greater than .50, because they're all designed to do that. The same with Federal HST or Speer Gold Dots. Same thing across the board, which means if the terminal ballistic performance is the same, why would I not go get more ammunition? So that's one of the reasons that the 40 is up here in the number 2 slot. The second reason that the 40 is here in the number 2 slot is because anything that I want to do with a 40 in terms of caliber, I can do better with a 45. All right, if you're obsessed with caliber and I gotta have a 4 in the front of my gun, then get a friggin' 45. Don't get a 40. You're better off with the 45, because the 40 is such a high pressure round that it's kind of sucks to shoot a lot. And I know I've probably shot 25,000 rounds of 40 over my career, and I don't particularly enjoy shooting it. The only place that 40 is really relevant anymore, and this is funny because 40 was originally like the ultimate tactical cartridge. It was designed for law enforcement, for face shooting bad guys. But the only place where 40 is really relevant anymore is competition shooting. And it's relevant in competition shooting because it allows you to make major power factor, which is important for USPSA shooters, and yet get a reasonable number of rounds in the magazine. So you can make major and get a lot of rounds in the gun. And that's where 40 is really relevant in this day and age is competition shooting. But as a self-defense round, you're better served with a 9 or a 45. And that brings us to the number 1 spot on the list. And the number 1 spot on the list is not actually a caliber. It's not 9, it's not 45, it's not 22 or some weird oddball caliber. It is bullshit gimmicky ammo like this Liberty Civil Defense crap or the G2 RIP or something like that. Alright? Here's the problem with ammo like this. It is a gimmick. It's 100% a gimmick, alright? This stuff, a 50 grain bullet at 2,000 feet per second, are you kidding me? That's going to hit tissue and it's just going to... and it's not going to penetrate. It's not going to create a significant it's not going to create a significant permanent wound cavity, and it's also not going fast enough to create hydrostatic shock or the sort of effects that you see from a rifle bullet. This is important, okay? Rifle bullets actually do have other wounding mechanisms beyond the permanent crush cavity. With rifle bullets, you have things like hydrostatic shock and temporary wound cavitation and stuff like that. To get those effects, you need to be driving elongated bullets at rifle velocities, which means like 3,000 feet per second, all right? 2,000 feet per second is nothing. That's garbage, okay? And it's not a heavy enough projectile to make a difference at that high of a velocity. It lacks the sectional density to really penetrate. Same with the G2 RIP ammo or Glazer safety slugs or all of these other garbage gimmick designs that don't actually work better than modern hollow point ammunition. Because remember, there is no handgun wounding mechanism other than permanent crush cavity, which means your bullet has to penetrate deep enough to reach vital organs after defeating common barrier materials like clothing and bone, and it's got to inflict significant damage on those blood-bearing structures to cause the threat to stop what it's doing. So, no such thing as stopping power. Don't carry a mouse gun like a 25 or a 32, and really don't carry a 22. Anything you can do with a 40, you can do better with a 9 or a 45. Don't buy gimmick ammo. It's crap. Stick to things like Winchester PDX-1 Defender, Federal HSTs, or Spear Gold Dots. There's a reason why those 3 rounds are the most common rounds in use with law enforcement today, and there's a reason why no major law enforcement agency that's actually serious about the use of firearms carries bullcrap gimmick ammo like this Liberty Ammunition Civil Defense. It's garbage. Don't buy garbage ammo. Think about it. If you're betting your life on the ammo in your gun, don't you want to have the best ammo possible? That's something to think about until our next video. And until next time, I'm Caleb Giddings. Thanks for watching. And remember, run your gun, not your mouth.